From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Open Line.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Open Line. I'm Carrie Sharp. Thank you for being with us tonight. Tonight's guest is State Senator Heidi Campbell. She's joining us to take your questions and phone calls. This is Open Line, so please, let's get those calls lined up. The next legislative session here in the state is starting after the first of the year, so there's going to be a lot of work going on your behalf. You might as well be informed, right? Give us a call. The number will be on the screen at 615-737+. Give us a holler tonight. In the meantime, I'm going to ask the questions. First of all, thank you for being here.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
It has been a very busy year for you, especially the last half of this year with the 5th District run. But I want to start by asking about your husband. Right before the election, you announced that he has cancer, and he's actually here in the studio with us tonight. Can you please give us an update?
He is fighting it. It's tough, but we're going through chemo. I'm a new member of the cancer culture.
Yep.
And it's definitely challenging. We're learning a lot, and but he's tough, and we're really hoping that he's gonna be able to pull through.
It is such a tough disease. I think so many people have been touched by it, including me, and we're just wishing you, all of you all, the very, very best. I mentioned it's been an extremely busy year for you. This campaign for the 5th District run that we just came out of, the new 5th District, you put up a big fight, did not win, lost to Andy Ogles. In order to enter the race, you had to believe that it was winnable. What were your thoughts? Why did you want to run for the 5th District?
You know, when I looked at the race initially, I said, you know, one of three things could happen. We could have, you know, Trump held accountable for things finally. We could have abortion get overturned, Roe get overturned, and then we could also get a really crazy, you know, pretty far right candidate. And all three of those things did happen, and we pulled this race right after the primary, and we were winning, and that was a legitimate poll, but you know, that was a long time, especially in news cycle worlds, for you know, opinions to shift primarily based upon inflation and the economy. I think that took attention off of the Dobbs decision and the fact that women's reproductive rights were being taken away. So so unfortunately that happened. And then I'll also say we had really some bad outcomes in terms of the Election Commission in Davidson County and how they were not doing a good job of making sure that people were informed about the new congressional districts. Voter turnout in Davidson County, where we were going to win this race, was anemic, 38%, and that's pretty pathetic. And so that doesn't track with other blue cities and red states. So if that voter turnout had been higher, we could have won it.
The thing that we were talking about on election night is that you had to win Davidson County by a very large margin, and Andy Ogles would have to win Murray County by a large margin, and likely Williamson, one of the two, by a very large margin. You know, we saw just before the election, as you mentioned, with the Election Commission and people getting the wrong ballots, you really think that had a big impact?
I know it had a huge impact. You know, I hear from people all the time who really felt like they didn't know where they were supposed to vote, who was on their ballots. There are people who still don't know who's representing them. So we gave in Davidson County, we gave the Election Commission over $1 million to get that information out, and it's unfortunate that wasn't done.
Do you think a Democrat can ever win the 5th District?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're out there and you're thinking about it, please, because it's definitely a race that can be won. We need to really work on getting the vote out in Davidson County, and that's going to be a lot of my work for the next couple of years.
Will you run again? Will you consider it?
Oh gosh, I don't know. That sounds exhausting right now. You know, we're headed into a legislative session, and I'm really looking forward to a lot of the legislation we're working on right now. So that's kind of my focus, and
that's what we're going to focus on the rest of the hour. But we already have a caller on the line. I like to take people as quickly as they call in. Denise is on the line. Denise, thanks for breaking the ice tonight, so others will call as well. Go ahead with your question.
Thanks. Okay, so I was just sitting here thinking about the priorities of those who are in power, how they have always put business interests and other kinds of interests above human interests. I think that with all the billions of dollars that's available at the state level and millions at the local level, if they were to make homelessness a priority, which I believe they should if they had their priorities right, because as a country, and this is a problem all over the country, the first thing you do is to make sure that the least of them are taken care of or helped or you pour into them so that they can get on their feet. And it's hard to call ourselves like the greatest country in the world and we're this and we're that when you've got people under bridges. And I think that each state, the governor who's sort of the leader of the state, and particularly in states like Tennessee where there's a bunch of money up there, you see where they're designating $500 million to go into arena. I'm thinking, my goodness, well, $100 million would do so much to help the homeless in the state. If you're going to give $500 million to an arena for a team whose owners are billionaires, why don't you put aside $100 or $150 million to get people who've been on the streets for decades? Because it says something about who you are. And I don't think they get it up there at the state level. I don't think they understand that they're not doing as good as they hoped. When they're on these commercials and they're being interviewed, or we've done this and we're doing this. And just like, for example, another aspect of this is this problem with the DCS. Okay, you can see where the priorities of the leadership is. And I just would never, ever, ever, as a leader, ever allow that in my state.
Yeah.
If everybody else was doing it different, I would do it right.
Yeah.
And I think we need someone who can rise up and begin to fight for people. That's what we really need.
Let's talk about both those issues. I had DCS on my radar. Homelessness, I did not. It's such an issue we've talked about, as you know, in Davidson County. We have such this problem. And money is finally being poured into some solutions at the state level. Is it on the radar at all?
So this is what I have spent most of my time on over the past 3 years, is the problems with DCS. I can't sleep at night sometimes because I'm so worried about these children and, quite frankly, the caseworkers, because the culture there is so toxic. And your caller is absolutely right. We have to. It's not just about being good people, although of course fundamentally that's very important to most of us. It's also about being economically smart. For example, we have kids now who are living in hospitals.
Right.
And they don't need to be in hospitals. They may have medical conditions, but they definitely should not be living in hospitals. And we have, for example, one child who was in a hospital 274 days of last year. So effectively, that's living in a hospital. And that is, borderline child abuse. That's not a good place for a child to be living. That's kind of like a prison,
And right now it's sanctioned by the state because DCS is in charge.
That's right. So the governor has agreed finally to look at putting $158 million at the behest of this new commissioner. And I do have to give her credit because she's actually called this out. And unlike the prior commissioner, is actually making a point of how, and this is the word she uses, horrific the conditions are. And I have to give her credit for that, and I really appreciate it. The problem is that what's being asked is that we actually put $158 million in the budget, which first of all probably isn't nearly enough, but secondly won't happen until June.
Right.
And so I am very concerned, and I wrote a letter to the governor about this, that we have to do something in the interim. And there are a lot of tools in his tool chest. You can call a special session. We've certainly done that for a lot of things. You could issue executive orders. We have over $10 billion in reserves, so we certainly have, as your caller said, the money to take care of these sorts of things. and it's indefensible that we wouldn't do it.
And here's the thing about DCS, and I know Margie Quinn is looking at this because she came in right when she was before she actually took office, but knew she was taking the job, and she did Open Line with us. DCS, as you likely know, used to be set up in two different branches. You had the juvenile justice side, and then you had really the foster care side. And a lot of people have said it worked better that way. And we are riddled with issues on both sides right now.
Right.
It is a lot for one person to take on, and there are just so many issues. Is money the place you have to start?
It is the place to start because we're in emergency situations, but in an ideal world, we'd actually look at the systemic issues and the way that we approach children's services in general. And as your caller said, you know, my disposition towards that is that we need to have more of a Maslowian approach, because we wouldn't be in this situation if we were taking care of some of these fundamental issues like homelessness, like affordable housing, like child care, and we aren't taking care of those issues. And so these are some of the casualties that we see as a result of that. But also to be approaching the Department of Children's Services as more of a family policing kind of mechanism juxtaposed to a family support mechanism, I think has been one of the biggest problems with it. Because the prior commissioner definitely looked sort of at these children as perps. And that's not the way we should be looking at children.
Right.
And you know, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes.
I understand that we have problems with a lot of these children and their behavior, but who wouldn't have behavioral problems if they're sleeping on an office floor, you know?
One question I often ask, and we ask each other in the newsroom, is there any state that runs their DCS well that we can look to and say, here's a great model? Because you see headline after headline, no one seems to be doing it well. Is that true?
Right. No, I think that most states are not doing it well. We have a hard time finding states that are good models, and I think that, you know, that doesn't get the state off the hook, because at least those other states, a lot of them are funding their children's services. You know, we are one of the worst states in terms of outcomes and in terms of caseworker attrition, and we're not paying our caseworkers enough. You know, $40,000 a year isn't a living wage. So yeah, no, I think that, like I said, I think, you know, we need to reapproach the way that we're dealing with children's services in general as more of a support mechanism and less of a you know, the community school program is a wonderful place to start, to look at the way community school programs build services around the schools so that it's addressing the needs of children outside of the school, so they can actually partake of, you know, the educational experience. Sometimes that means that they need to bring in, you know, extra clothes. Sometimes they need to bring in food. Dentists. Sometimes dentists come in and volunteer their services, and that kind of an approach to our entire disposition towards educating and taking care of children and families in our state would go a long way towards changing the trajectory of this DCS program and these children.
You said you've written a letter to Governor Lee asking him to act now, put some money there now.
Yes.
Any response?
We have not gotten a response from the governor. I had a lot of legislators who signed on to it. I think 9 legislators. And I co-wrote that letter with Representative Gloria Johnson, who has also worked with me on the legislation that we've been running the past few sessions to reduce caseworkers. I mean, case loads for caseworkers.
No response at this time.
No response.
Okay,
no.
We'll be watching. We're going to take a quick break. We'd love to take more of your questions. Go ahead and give us a call, 615-737+. And Denise, when we come back, we'll talk about just homelessness. So stay with us. We'll get that question answered too.